Surprising number of people have been asking me what my iOS 16 wish list is, and I'm ready to disappoint because I actually really like iOS 15 in its current state. Granted, no operating system is perfect, but when it comes to optimizing for the hardware available on the devices that it's running, I actually think iOS is one of those operating systems that has kind of reached one of its maximum potentials. So every year my wish list gets a tad more nitpicky, and often things get carried over wish list after wish list because Apple will still not cater to my hyper-specific needs. So we've still got another 7 months before any of this stuff is actually confirmed from Apple, but without further ado, here's what I would like changed with iOS. Let's begin. You guys know how much I love 5G, right? No, despite my constant bickering, I often end up turning off 5G just because I know it'll preserve my battery health quite a bit better, and I've gone into settings quite a bit just to see if I'm actually in an area that has 5G, and I think what would be somewhat helpful to me, and maybe people out there that don't have access to it but don't want their modems screaming, searching for that signal, and draining their battery much faster, is a quick toggle to switch between 4G and 5G, which I know many of you are thinking that's what 5G Auto already does, right? Well, in my experience, not really. Even if you don't have very strong 5G signal, or if you're in an area where you're actually going to get faster 4G speeds, I pretty much notice my phone always defaulting to 5G if I leave it on 5G Auto. Makes sense. Apple's very proud of this feature. Carriers brag about it all the time, but if just within Control Center, I could hold down that cellular icon and just say, switch to 4G only, just to preserve battery life, that would be great, but I imagine the reason Apple won't do it is because that would be admitting that there are problems with 5G, and in the future Apple wants to design their own in-house modems that will probably be far more power efficient, and we won't have the big battery drain issues that we do have right now with 5G. Once again, to me, feels like the technology was rushed before it was ready, and a lot of everyday consumers probably don't realize that their battery life could be much, much better if they just turned it off. But still, if we're talking about my wish list, I get to be picky. So that's my first request. Second of all, will please all of you, because I'm sure it's the most common request I've seen from everybody. Yes, I believe the battery percentage should be an option. Personally, I would likely not use it because I like the top of my phone being fairly simple and minimal, but I've probably read like 39 billion comments of people saying, why can't they add the battery percentage back? Because people want to see that exact precise number at the top of the phone. I don't mind just checking it through Control Center anyway, but I have nothing against there being an option for those who want it. There's been countless jailbreak tweaks that have showcased the ideas of how Apple could easily implement it. You could very simply borrow some battery widgets from the Apple Watch and just put them in the top corner of your iPhone. Honestly, I think Apple could add it to all iPhones with a notch. I don't think it would just have to be the iPhone 13 series, but I know Apple and they want to incentivize people to get the latest and greatest phones. So if you want to restrict the new battery percentage feature to just the new iPhones, I guess that's better than nothing, which is what we have now. So however they want to do it, sure, having a battery percentage always there is nice, even though they don't really even have it on Macs, although iPadOS, ironically, still supports it, which is kind of weird. But this kind of ties into a running theme I see people have with iOS every year, which is just overall more customization. This is absolutely a strength people all see on Android, and yes, when there's so many different tactics and there's so many different operating system tips and tricks that Android and iOS come up with, it's natural they're gonna copy from each other. So don't feel like you're a creative person for commenting, oh, all these things are on Android, because every year we get all these Android updates that were typically already a thing on iOS as well, and that's fine. They copy from each other, and they try to implement it best for their use case. This is the tech world, okay? Nothing is 100% original anymore. Everything is a redesign, or a re-implementation, or a re-optimization. So yes, a lot of the things we're talking about today are from Android, but the biggest one for me that feels like a huge oversight is the quick toggles from the iOS lock screen. It's always been default to camera and flashlight, and that's pretty much your only options. I've always found that weird, considering you can just kind of swipe to the side and access the camera anyway. So why do we need like 2 ways to access the camera from the lock screen? I would love to switch one of those toggles to a calculator, or a specific app that you want to open every single time, or a certain Siri shortcut you guys can imagine. Just having some more control over that lock screen, I agree, would be nice. Some people may not want the date up there. Some people might want little micro widgets of like how many texts you have have just having, similar to the complication on the Apple Watch, a messages icon. So from the lock screen, you can see how many unread emails you have or unread text messages and that kind of thing, or rearranging that clock or whatnot. Yes, I feel like that lock screen has been the same for so long, so any kind of customization there would be appreciated. But once you're through the lock screen and onto the home screen, I really feel like widgets in their current implementation are not super useful. I know a handful of people that have found some that they like, but in my use case, there's not been a ton of widgets that I find super useful because they're too big and they can't be interactive, which is something I thought they would bring with iOS 15. So now I'm carrying this over from last year's wishlist video. I want interactive widgets because I think the main advantage of having widgets on the lock screen should be addressing commands and checking things without having to open the app, whereas widgets in their current state seem to be all about just delivering a little bit more information but taking up way more space on your home screen. So if we could have like a now playing widget with play, pause, and skip commands, that would save me having to go to Control Center every single time. You know, for cars that have apps that you can control your car from the phone, being able to have different quick commands from that widget so that you don't have to open the app overall would be much better. Even finance apps, if you could have little buy sell buttons built into that widget so that you can essentially do major transactions or pay off your Apple Card without even having to open the app, I think could save a lot of time. Maybe some people think that the buttons being right there is just too much, or that would use up more energy or that type of thing. It's possible, but with Apple's extreme efficiency in their CPUs now, I feel like that's not a good excuse. And yes, we've seen it done on Androids in the past. Granted, with worse battery efficiency, but I think there's a good way for Apple to implement interactive widgets, and on top of that, smaller widgets. I feel like it's crazy how every year Apple's like, here's an even bigger widget with like an absurd amount of information that covers up your entire home screen, and I just want to know what the take rate is on these extra large widgets, because I feel like they deliver a crap ton of information, but because they're not interactive, you just open the app anyway, so it's not really saving that much time. I would appreciate a widget that only takes up the space of 2 applications. That way it can be much smaller and you can read a decent amount of information from that widget, but just make better use of space with these fairly large displays that Apple's been shipping for a while now, particularly with the 13 Pro Max. This screen is huge and I feel like there's a tad too much spacing between all the apps and widgets and stuff. Outside of that, I know a lot of people want the apps to be rearrangeable so that you can put them just at the bottom. That's never been super useful to me, but I see it requested every year, so I'll go ahead and throw it in this wish list as well. Yes, I would be fine with the option of people being able to put apps wherever you want to on the home screen, just so your thumb doesn't have to reach all the way to the top of the phone and you don't have to use some weird hack to get apps at the very, very bottom. And people want to appreciate their wallpaper more, which I would appreciate if Apple allowed for more dynamic wallpapers. This kind of ties along with my watchOS wish list as well, because I love the time-lapse watch face on my Apple Watch, and I would love it if any time-lapse I took from my phone could instantly become a watch face with the time-lapse playing. And a similar thing I think could work with the dynamic wallpaper. You could have it autoplay whenever you turn on the phone. You just get your time-lapse of an awesome sunset or whatever you recorded, and if you don't want that much motion on your display, you could set it to only activate for haptic touch, so a long press plays the time-lapse, and when you let go, it goes back to a static image. Just some more motion going on in the background of the home screen would be kind of cool. Another super common request that I've seen a ton of people ask for, especially now with the iPhone 13 series, because we finally have LTPO OLED panels, which means the refresh rate can dynamically change. A ton of people want that always on display, where you can have the clock or a few widgets or even just a notification light stay on even when you're not using your phone. I've tried always on displays on phones in the past, and I've never really found a sweet spot for it. It always just annoys me, and I like knowing the display is all the way off when it's in my pocket, and if it's sitting at a table or sitting on my nightstand or whatnot, I don't want it even having a couple pixels on, because at least with my Apple Watch, I do notice a battery draw with any device that uses an always on display. It may be small, but it's still there, and that kind of bugs me. So I'm still in favor of Apple adding it though, because that would be an option that would make a lot of people happy. So this is about more than just me, but yes, I feel like they could have added an always on display before. They still haven't, maybe because they're waiting to add it in a big iOS update like iOS 16. But with the iPhone 13 series now, it would probably be more efficient than ever and have the least amount of power draw, which might be Apple's biggest reason for not supporting it. There's another quick setting I think Apple could easily add to Control Center that would save me a ton of time, because often I'm using my phone in a very, very dark room, and even when the display brightness is turned down all the way, the screen still feels too bright and we want to get the brightness even lower. So typically I go to settings, I hit reduce white point, and then dynamically adjust the even lower brightness setting from there. I feel like they could just build that into the brightness toggle in Control Center. I'm sure some of you have some quick toggle or Siri shortcut, but I'm in favor of just it by default being in the brightness tab so that when you lower it down all the way, just a little option that says, is this not dim enough? Do you want to dim it further? Little thing, but I'd use it a lot and I'd appreciate it. One feature that I saw, I think an LG phone do a long time ago, or maybe it was HTC. I honestly can't remember because it's been years, but I've always struggled with the automatic orientation feature on phones where my wife always has orientation lock turned on and I always have it turned off. And I felt like now with Face ID and better face tracking software, iOS could, in an encrypted, private manner, of course, find a way to just track the orientation of my face, perhaps using the dot projector, not having to activate the actual camera because it doesn't need to see that, but just when it notices the accelerometer change in orientation, if it could very quickly do another check and see if the user's face has also rotated with the phone, and if the face has also rotated, then you don't need to automatically shift the orientation, because I watch a lot of YouTube on my phone, so that's why I have orientation lock off, because I'll tap a video and switch to landscape, or I'll take a video, look at a picture, switch to landscape. But oftentimes I'll be using iMessage, and sometimes I lay down on the couch or lay down in bed, and when I rotate, it automatically thinks, oh, you want to type in landscape now. But I feel like the dot projector could do a good job checking, oh, his face has also rotated, therefore don't rotate the entire UI. But if the face isn't rotated and just the phone is, in that case, yes, complete the orientation. Android phones have done it in the past. There might be still some that do it, but I think Apple could do a decent job with it and not have it compromise on security or privacy. But back on the subject of customization, when it comes to charging, I think that Apple being forced to add the battery health feature and showcase like a real percentage has made a lot of people paranoid at what is genuinely good for their battery. And the optimized battery charging feature is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's trying to let customers know that, yeah, just charge your iPhone regularly and we'll monitor your charging habits and then do our best to preserve your battery health by capping the battery at 80% until a certain time, and then we'll charge up to 100. But I think they could expand on this more, particularly since there's a lot of people with iPhones that they plan on owning for a long time, and especially with the existence of the 13 mini, there's expensive iPhones that don't really have gigantic batteries in them. So more scheduled charging options. Like, I would like it if I could set my phone to stop at 80% until a certain time of the day without having to wait for the algorithm to pick up on the, optimized battery charging algorithm. Right now, when you first get an iPhone, it takes a few weeks for it to catch on at like, oh, this is the time where the phone normally is done charging. Therefore, I'll stop it at 80% from here on out. But if you could just do that from day one. Also, I know a ton of people where their schedule is constantly fluctuating, so the battery charging algorithm doesn't really know exactly when to bring the phone to 100 versus where to bring it to 80. So if similar to do not disturb customization, you could go in and say, on these certain days, stop at 80% until a certain time. Or for some people who maybe really care about battery health, let them cap it at 80% like indefinitely or 90% indefinitely, as well as offer options for people who only have a fast charger potentially, but don't want to fast charge the iPhone every single time. Many people don't want to keep around like the cheaper, slower 5-watt charge brick and already have a 20-watt USB-C brick, or even bigger for some devices. This goes bigger than just iPhones. But if you had the option of saying, if I plug this in at nighttime, don't fast charge the battery because that's going to heat it up and age out the phone quicker. But if I do plug it in, at 10 in the morning or in the afternoon because I forgot to charge it last night, then you can fast charge it up. But just giving some more options on how the battery can receive a fast charge versus a slow charge would be very much appreciated, because in my wife's case, she just had a fast charger in the bedroom and plugged it into her iPhone SE every night, so it was fast charging quite a bit, even though it had optimized battery charging turned on, and I noticed the battery health going down pretty substantially. So I think some software tinkering could have prevented that, or at least slowed down the battery health degradation. But my last wish for iOS 16 is fairly specific for content creators, but it's something I think Apple could actually do really well. Let the iPhone be an external webcam for our Macs, because Apple brags all about these telephoto lenses and ultra-wide cameras and how good the depth tracking data is for cinematic mode and that type of thing. And we've got these really powerful sensors with really powerful hardware hardware on our phones, and I would love the option to be able to plug that directly into my Mac and treat it as a built-in webcam. And before you start commenting, yes, I know there are third-party apps that already allow for this, but most of them either have ads or they cost money, and some of them don't work very well. So I'm basically pitching Apple to pull another, you know, Duet Display or True Tone, where they see an idea that third parties have come up with and decide to build this in natively. Yes, I'm evil, but I'm only evil because I think that would be easier for the end user for all of this stuff to be first party and integrated, rather than have to download an app and make an account and have another password, or have to pay for an additional service. I think because of how strong the Apple ecosystem is with itself, it makes sense for this to be something built in, and Apple makes it fairly easy to capture your screen through QuickTime and whatnot, but you can't really access the full quality of that sensor of your iPhone as a dedicated webcam for live streaming, or maybe just people want more advanced FaceTime calls. But I personally could see a lot of use cases where people might want to record a video from their iPhone directly into their Final Cut or iMovie timeline for video production. That way we can bypass that whole record the video on the phone and then share the video to the computer. No, let's just use the phone's camera but record it onto the Mac's SSD. However, you'd probably be limited by your resolution and frame rate because the Lightning port is so dang slow. Maybe there's a good reason to add USB-C then, Apple, but that's not for an iOS 16 video. I'll save that subject for another time, but I'm sure there's all kinds of crazy ideas you guys have for iOS 16 as well, so feel free to let me know what you want down below. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you in the next one.